Okay, good morning, everyone. Hello, thanks for joining. I'm James Robb from the GIA Sustainability Committee. Welcome to our 8th Countdown to COP event, which we started at the start of last year, and we're working through different sustainability topics each month, leading up to the COP26 conference in Glasgow, which is starting in November. Today, we're going to be talking about sustainable landscapes. So we've got 3 great speakers, Karen, Duncan, and Greg, who are all landscape architects, going to be talking about some of their projects, which respond in some way to sustainability or climate change, climate emergency. And so we'll go through each speaker one by one, about 10-minute presentation each, and then we should have time for a Q&A at the end. So a couple of housekeeping points. Firstly, this is being recorded, so we host the session online on the GIA website afterwards for anyone to watch back again. So don't say anything you don't wish to be shared. Also, if you can please stay on mute and keep your camera off while we're going through the presentations, that would be really helpful. And if you have questions along the way, pop them in the chat box, and I'll sort of collate and collect them at the end and put them to the speakers. And yeah, any other issues that if there's anything going wrong with the audio, yeah, stick an alert in the chat box, and we can deal with it. So I think without further ado, I'll ask Karen to join us, please. And welcome, Karen. If you can please share your screen, and we'll get your slides up.
Okay.
That's great. Thanks, Karen. So over to you.
Right. Well, hi, everybody. Climate evolution is a high-level and ambitious strategy for change and regeneration, covering the western part of East Lothian. It was commissioned in September 2019 and produced by us, Open, working with the engineers Stantec. Our client group was led by East Lothian Council in partnership with the agencies that you see here. This strategy has gone through public consultation through lockdown and will be adopted as supplementary planning guidance in the autumn. East Lothian is famed for its beaches and rolling, productive agricultural land. But this side, the west side, is the less known part where industry once flourished and has now declined. Coal mining has been part of this area for 700 years and until relatively recently. And all these main industries have now gone and have left behind both a negative and a positive legacy. With the development of a new settlement at Greater Blindwells on brownfield land, which is this area in here, and opportunities for employment around the now closed power station site at Cockenzie within here, this gives an opportunity for ambitious planning that can benefit the whole of this area. And it should be said that this is also one of the most deprived areas within the Central Belt of Scotland. We're in a state of climate emergency. Scotland's target is to ensure all emissions are offset by 2045, with a 75% target by 2030. That is less than a decade away. In essence, it's going to bring significant risks to how we live, what we eat, our health, and our economy. Carbon offsetting is not the answer. We have to change, and we have to move quickly from talking to action. This vision is intended to help stimulate social, economic, and environmental regeneration within this area. So how can a strategy designed to address climate emergency actually help do that? Well, we live in a global ecosystem, and this quote from John Muir here is still relevant, especially as he was born in East Lothian and remained proud of being Scottish all of his life. In order to rationalise this strategy, unravelling the everything into defined stages, it was formed along a structure where at the centre is a primary aim of making sure that those settlements within the climate evolution area are resilient places which can flourish and cope with climate change, are self-sustaining, and will foster a mentally and physically healthy population. Feeding into that outcome are the 5 key strategies in order to achieve that. We did some high-level technical work around those, and critically, we had a consultation event with key stakeholders and decision makers, which helped consolidate and extend our initial thoughts. The outcome is, by definition, strategic. Before we move on to the 5 key themes, it's worth just mentioning that the starting point for managing climate change within this area, and which most heavily influences all 5 strategies, is water management, and managing it on a big sub-regional scale, which will properly address the risks we know we already have, and which only will get worse with heavier rainfall and increased drought conditions. Firstly, we have several combined sewers which drain directly into the Forth. With increased storms happening as a result of climate change, the system can't cope. The outflows are bypassing all cleaning systems, and the pipes are discharged without treatment to the Firth of Forth, which pollutes an internationally environmentally protected area. Secondly, the legacy of mining within this area over so many centuries has led to an extensive network of water-filled mining tunnels underneath the ground. Surface water flooding from the mine water or any collapse at ground level are being controlled by the water being pumped out at 450 litres per second. Thirdly, surface water flooding occurs as a result of inefficient watercourses and culverts within this area. They've got limited carrying capacity, and they leach water into the sewers and into the mine water. This is further exacerbated by the East Coast Railway line, which runs along here, and by the A1 along here, which dissect the natural flow of water across the land and into the Forth. This problem is only going to worsen as population growth and urban expansion continues, and if we don't manage our open space to properly adapt and mitigate against this. Looking now at the 5 key strategies and some of the proposals within them. In Scotland, the greatest proportion of our greenhouse gases come from transport, around 32%, excluding international aviation and shipping. Clearly, we need to change our habits, and more than half of all journeys are less than 2 miles, which is 30 minutes of walking. So the access and movement strategy focuses on how we move around, making it logical and easy to leave the car behind or get rid of it altogether, offering easy alternatives. And that includes setting up gateway hubs of integrated sustainable transport system, creating a new major travel hub around Greater Blindwell's new town with a new station on the East Coast main railway line, an increase in the number and hierarchy of active travel routes. And that would be accompanied by other softer strategies that support these around integrated multimodal and good value ticketing, trial-free bike schemes, and alternative bike schemes such as electric, cargo, and assisted bikes. For the water management strategy, we propose a number of different solutions that work together across this whole sub-regional area. The key is to take as much water flow out of the system as possible and use above ground systems to deliver multiple other benefits around energy, active travel, outdoor activity, biodiversity, and enterprise. And this is an example of the reopening of one of the key culverts across the area, which is called the Bankton Adit, which would deliver at once multiple benefits and could also be playful using differing water temperatures as a result of the geothermal warming of water that's coming from the mine water. The third strand was about culture, leisure, and activity, and it's centred on building on the rich heritage which exists at the moment, which is the positive legacy of the industries within Western East Lothian, and adding a layer of opportunity which arises from this strategy. Tourism trends are exciting opportunities for East Lothian. People look for breaks, which with the health and well-being experiences, artisan food and drink experience, and destinations which have conscience. Whilst the creation of climate evolution is aimed at the quality of life for those that live here, increasing visitor footfall will help support the existing businesses, allow new business to start up and to flourish, and it will create an economy of supply needs. Climate change is, of course, closely related to biodiversity loss and the emerging ecological crisis. And we need to seek opportunities to create and improve integrated habitat networks, protect our existing natural heritage assets, seek opportunities for increased tree planting and grassland management, and create new blue-green infrastructure. And all open space needs to help work a bit harder in order to achieve this. This is an illustrative example showing how the principle for large areas of high amenity grassland can be repurposed, allowing surface water drainage to collect, reduce maintenance costs, increase biodiversity, cool urban temperatures, whilst less water flows into the combined sewer system. And proposals such as this can be part of new design work or can be retrofit solutions into existing areas of green space. The final strategy is for creating resilient communities with good opportunities for employment and giving prospects and choice, particularly to young people. And the aim is to make sure as many people as possible can live and work locally, allowing them to travel to work sustainably, spend limited time commuting, and allow a better work-life balance, all good for the environment. It's also to make sure that the proposals foster as many opportunities as possible for that younger generation, but also for new families who have been locating recently into this area. And that can be done through investment in innovation, encouraging enterprise and creating links with other institutions. And additional employment opportunities will be created at Kenzie. One of the most exciting opportunities for creating strong communities and achieving net zero carbon targets is around geothermal energy. Extracting the geothermal energy from that mining underground water offers the right conditions in order to achieve this. It's a neat synergy that the industry, which has led to some of the present problems within the area, could help unlock a better future. The energy source is clean and can provide heat and energy to both existing local communities and to the new Greater Blindwells community through district heating networks. It would address fuel poverty through lower cost solutions and could provide an income stream for the council that will help pay for improvement to council housing stock. Most of these proposals will require further feasibility before detailed plans can be joined up, and the strategy was accompanied by an action plan which provides initial signposting for the council and will need to be developed further as the strategy develops. Achieving social, economic, and environmental regeneration through the lens of climate change is complex, and each of those 5 strategy strands are intrinsic to the rest. This diagram shows how everything works together and relates back to that quote I showed at the beginning by John Muir about how everything in our global ecosystem is connected. This shows how the short, medium, and long-term projects would come together in order to achieve climate adapted and resilient communities and landscapes, and it could be within a time span of 30 years. Projects such as this create unique and exceptional circumstance, a complex alignment of scale, opportunities, location, and partnership, but the wins here could be immeasurable. The strategy is the easy part, delivery is infinitely more complex. But what is clear is that we need to be much smarter in the future in how we plan and regenerate our places. Thanks very much.
That was great. Thanks very much for that, Karen. We'll come to questions at the end. So like I said, everyone, if you have any points to ask Karen on that, then put them in the chat box or save them to the end and we'll talk them. Duncan, if I can ask you to load up your screen now, please. Yeah, really interesting, Karen. I think 3 great strands there about responding to climate change with managing water and future weather patterns, the active travel point, and then also the energy generation from renewable sources point. So we'll come back to that later on. Duncan, if you're ready to go ahead.
Thank you, James. I take it you can see my screen okay?
Yep.
Excellent. Thank you for the invite to talk today. I'm going to talk about the Claypits project in Glasgow, which is a site that's located less than 1 kilometre from Glasgow city centre. LUC have been involved for the best part of 6 years now, undertaking various studies and projects in and around the Claypits site, but ultimately resulting in the delivery of the Claypits local nature reserve, one of the few local nature reserves, inner city nature reserves in Scotland. The project is about how an underutilised green space can contribute to the sustainable development of and regeneration of disconnected and disadvantaged communities. Underlying principles include the improvement of the health and well-being of local people by facilitating access to improved green spaces and encouraging activity, but it also integrates significant infrastructure to support sustainable development in neighbouring communities, most notably the integration of improved active travel and service and SUDS infrastructure to support development on adjacent brownfield sites. I'm just going to start quickly by a study we did back in 2015, which was an access study of the canal corridor in Glasgow. And I think it was established that the canal corridor itself, the towpath, actually offered quite a significant active travel route into and out of the city centre, but it actually acted as a significant barrier to more orbital routes between North Glasgow and the West End. And I think that was quite acutely felt between the kind of disadvantaged communities of the north compared to the fairly affluent communities of the West End and all the facilities that are located in that location. So one of the key outputs of this strategy was trying to overcome the barrier that is represented by the canal, and in simple terms that we're talking bridges and or tunnels. But we also recognise the opportunity that if we introduce new crossings to the canal itself, those should become destinations in their own right, encouraging people to the canal and to make that more strategic movement within the city itself. We followed that with a more site-specific study informed by an intensive charrette process. The Scottish Canals wanted us to look at 3 communities in particular that straddled the canal, Firhill, Hamilton Hill and Woodside, between the Applecross Basin and the Firhill Basin. This is roughly about 1 kilometre square. We undertook a lot of baseline study of the site area itself, lots of site issues, topography issues, potential flooding issues, the historic infrastructure of the canal itself. These are all factors that we had to consider. And also the kind of heritage value of what had gone before. There's a fantastic image of the site area from about the mid-1960s. So you can see the kind of legacy of industrial use through the old clay pit itself, timber basins, Partick Thistle Stadium, and the fairly derelict leftover land with not much happening on it. Just a few images of the baseline context from about that time. Recognizing that we felt there was a real opportunity here because there was some real positive attributes. So the canal itself, the basins, clay pits, which was a bit of a hidden gem that not many people knew about. Partick Thistle kindly gave us their stadium for 4 days so that we could run a 4-day intensive charrette, which included consultation with over 350 local stakeholders via workshops, site walkovers, presentations, an outreach art project, which was hugely successful. And it kind of led to a very simple vision, which was that these 3 communities were going to be regenerated, but would have a clay pits, a positive green space at its heart in the form of the Clay Pits project. And then there would be 2 kind of nodal activity points at Firhill Basin and Applecross Basin. And again, this idea of overcoming the barrier that is the canal itself. That was transformed into a development framework underpinned by a strong green network strategy and access strategy. And ultimately the Claypits master plan, which is about 17 hectares in total. It's quite difficult to read this master plan. So the key components were the Garskew Bridge. So again, coming back to that first principle of overcoming the barrier of the canal. So we had a new technically challenging bridge because we had to accommodate boat movements on the canal itself. So it's a moving retractable bridge. Significant access infrastructure. It's about 1.5 kilometers of new path infrastructure with defined gateways created at strategic locations. So no more climbing through holes in palisade fences. Garskew Link gets a special mention. It's considered the kind of front door to the site and a bit more sculptural in form. And the idea that we were encouraging activity and play throughout. So this was for all ages, so not just children, but this idea of encouraging nodes and the access framework that would encourage activity, health and well-being. Residential moorings were accommodated, and SUDS infrastructure. So this is as part of the smart canal strategy. So this is the ability for Scottish Canals to manage the water levels in the canal to respond to rainfall and allowing adjacent development to drain via SUD schemes into the canal itself. Service infrastructure to accommodate powering of the bridge, for example, but also to facilitate development of brownfield site within the site, the overall site itself, and habitat creation. I mean, the whole site could be considered a site where we've improved the habitat, but I've picked 3 blobs here in particular. One was a kind of wetland reed habitat in the far north on the old timber basin. We've got a central glade of wildflower meadow, and we've also created a wetland habitat in relation to the main SUDS basin. Construction, always nice to have some images of some of the fun toys the contractor got out to play with. Really difficult site in terms of access, hence some of the slightly unusual bits of kit and plant that were used. And this is quite poignant because this was about March 2020. So this is the state of the site when we all went into lockdown 18 months ago. So this is the coffer dam for the retractable bridge. This is the boardwalk across the timber basin and path infrastructure. And I put this image in because I'm often loath to encourage vegetation clearance, but in this instance, we knew there was fantastic views out over the city from this location. So it's amazing some of the views that we have created here. And just to try and finish off with some completion photos. It's now designated local nature reserve, whereas formerly it was designated as vacant derelict land. It's been opened for the best part of 6 weeks now. This is the Garskew Bridge aligned with Trossachs Street. We've got fishing platforms at Firhill Basin. We've got the residential moorings on the canal in the far north. We've got the activity nodes. You can't quite see it. This is one of the SUD swales integrated with the landscape with the bridge crossing, Palmere Gate, boardwalk across the reed beds. Some of the activity nodes, it's being extremely well used, extremely well received by the local community. A raft of positive social media coverage, from which I've taken this image from a kind of local drone specialist of Garskew Blink. So this responds to the more sculptural forms to create this kind of global gateway to the Claypits project from Garskew Road. And we were lucky enough to work with the Alistair Gray archive to integrate some of his words and text within Garskew Blink itself. And I'll just finish off by mentioning some of the funders, of which there are many. I won't go through them all, but they're all on here. The total value was about 7 million, and funding came from various sources. And I'll just finish with a slightly abstract image of railings and paving at Garscube Link. Thank you, James.
That's great. Thanks, Duncan. Lovely image there of two elements which could be considered quite boring, but looks very nice there. Yep, and that's a great project to hear more about. Living locally, personally been enjoying getting in there since it's been open. And yeah, it's a great area, particularly around that, for me. Well, a few things, I guess. Habitat improvement, access to the green space, helping maybe those surrounding communities be more healthy communities, access to healthy spaces.
I would say it's very difficult to squeeze that project into 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I tried my best.
So, yeah, I mean, Greg, if you want to get your screen loaded up, please, for the next section, and we'll come back to you later on, Duncan, in the Q&A. Welcome, Greg. That's not quite full screen, I'm afraid.
About it? No? Is it still not?
No. See, we've got a few questions coming in the chat. So yeah, anyone else who has any more, please do stick them in there. If you want to hear anything else that the speakers haven't mentioned, or if you've got a particular interest in a particular aspect, we're going to get to that in the Q&A.
Any better?
Still seeing all your toolbars, to be honest, Greg.
So it's full screen at my end. Give me 2 seconds. I'll share my desktop rather than the window. That better?
That's great. Yeah. Thanks, Greg. On you go.
So yeah, thanks again for the invitation to present this afternoon. For those of you who don't know, I'm Greg Meikle, a principal landscape architect for LDA Design in Glasgow, and I'm just going to run through Sighthill transformational regeneration area, in which LDA have been working alongside Glasgow City Council to deliver a landscape-led master plan on the northern periphery of the city. So, yeah, the site itself, a 10-minute walk. Most of you will be familiar with the points here on the plan. Yeah, so really a key spot on the northern periphery of the city centre, and very easily accessible if the appropriate moves were made. The site's history, I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with, but it's, as with the majority of Glasgow, it's had, it's an industrial past. It used to house a power station. That power station was then decommissioned over time. There was the housing boom, which then seen, the trend at the time of the high-storey blocks constructed, the tenements done away with. The motorway was really the killer for Sighthill, if you like, in terms of its separation from the city centre. You can see the image in the top right here and what that actually does. You can picture the Pinxton cooling tower in the far north and the high-rise flats over to the right. And that really, Sighthill kind of went on a backwards trend from there on, which was really unfortunate. And, the poverty and deprivation and the kind of gangland crimes and things, it was really, it went to quite a bad place. There was the Glasgow City Council were really keen, the next thing that Sighthill had was a lot better. Over time, the tower blocks were demolished through 2008 to 2016. This is almost a you know, an insight to the emotional journey that has happened throughout Sighthill. You know, it was a really, you know, when industry was thriving, it was a great place to stay. There was a lot of social in the area, social activities, I mean, and people interacting as a community. The housing was a great boom again for everybody, but then recession hit and people started losing jobs. And, you know, the 1980s, 90s, it started to suffer. Glasgow City Council wanted to change that. And through a landscape-led master plan, they wanted to regenerate and transform Sighthill once again. So a response to that, there was no sort of preconceptions here in terms of appearing with a plan, you know, with shapes on it. It was all about a sensory response, you know, physically in terms of its geography, topographical, ecological, its, you know, its culture, our written history, and obviously emotional. Just quite a fitting quote there that we used quite often as part of the engagement process. We had to understand the place, and through, you know, the conversations and the consultation with the existing residents and surrounding residents, we done that through visually, and generated this map, this emotional map to accompany the timeline, to just understand, you know, that there was the cemetery to the far north. There was obviously Fountain Well where the high rise was. Some really interesting stories in terms of Jack's Mountain and the Stinky Ocean, which were actually, you know, those came for the kids that stayed there, and nowadays sort of frowned upon. But, you know, Jack's Mountain was actually slag. It was industrial waste. The Stinky Ocean was the effluent and all the kind of bad things that were coming out of that. But the kids had nothing else to do. They found this really interesting and loved playing there, which we found really interesting. There was natural curling ponds to the north that were formed through springs. And something that I'll touch on earlier is the cuddies, which are standing stones, which Duncan Lunan, the kind of Glasgow astronomist, had aligned. And these, you know, had a strong part in the heart of the community. A lot of people spent time there and enjoyed it as a tranquil space. There was also the canal basin over to the west at North Canal Bank Street. We then looked to develop a vision. And this vision was about the connectivity and taking some really bold moves and connecting, you know, further developments to the north and further communities, and how we could bring them down through and get them connected back to the city centre. Big bold moves in terms of taking a boulevard straight through and bringing that back down to across a new active travel footbridge, and, you know, promoting active travel throughout the segregation, the areas given to pedestrians, to cyclists and the like, is far more than what vehicles are. And then it was, you know, touching on the sustainability of the landscape. It was the ponds and the lochs and everything else, the water that inspired this vision, and how we could integrate that into the landscape, and also again connect back to the canal, which was such a great asset to have in the doorstep. So yeah, this landscape-led master plan was one of the biggest, and still is one of the biggest of its type out west of London. 30 hectares of a 48-hectare site is being delivered as open green space for the public. It has a new community campus within it. It has a new church within it. There's loads of new community facilities within here as well. And yeah, it's an integrated green and blue infrastructure system, which we'll go on to touch on. The housing approach thereafter is about 850 to 900, you know, 10-year blind homes, and there was always something there to make sure that if people came here and had a one-bed studio, for example, but loved the community and would like to, you know, have a family or move to something bigger, there was possibilities to do that within Sighthill and not need to, you know, go and move into a new community within Glasgow city centre. A big one, which is now in place, is obviously the reconnecting of the whole of Sighthill and the northern part of Glasgow back to the city centre, and the active travel bridge is now in place across the M8, which connects you straight back on to and down into George Square, 10-minute walk max. So yeah, just to kind of emphasise the point in terms of how much landscape was being delivered, and and everything you kind of see here that's green on the plan, the housing is faded out, is almost complete. Within the next 3 to 4 weeks, we'll hopefully be in a position where this is now all open to the public, and the housing has started, but will be built out over I think between a 7 and a 10-year period by Keep Moat Homes. But the narrative and making sure everybody had the appropriate spaces, had appropriate names, and people could relate to it was very important. And here you can see some of that. Some of them new, but very relatable in terms of a village green allotments, the Wreck and the Wet Meadows, and some being a reinterpretation of the things that really what the community loved. So Jack's Mountain, we reinterpreted that as a huge level change to get down to the canal and integrate the play that the guys loved, along with some walks and more kind of peripheral routes that people could meander along. It was always going to be landscape led. Even the streets within which will follow will encourage play and active travel, community engagement, social engagement, incidental play, and these kind of woodlands. So these were all visionary imageries at the outset. The architectural evolution has came along. Kind of what we're shaping up here is the master plan as a whole. Keep Moat Homes, alongside Collective Architecture and Glasgow City Council and ourselves, have pushed forward the architectural development for this, and designed the route and the aesthetic and how these should all shape up and how the spaces between should interact, and that's what Keep Moat are now delivering upon. So where we're at, I've mentioned we're almost nearly there. So here's an image from what we call the Wreck and the Wet Meadows, looking south back towards the city, the back end of the city skyline there. You can see the houses for Keep Moat starting to be delivered in the very far north. But you can see here, from a sustainability point of view, the suds ponds that work their way down through the park, a series of locks, different scales, different types in terms of swales, sud basins, just to kind of re-represent burns and the like, these natural elements. These are all different. They're all there to encourage people to engage with the sustainable drainage system. And the sustainable drainage system and the green infrastructure is quite innovative in itself, that this whole development, 90% plus of the surface water is treated via a sud system in one way or another before discharging into the canal. Now, Duncan touched on the smart canal system. Sighthill again plugs into that and has the capacity to back up, if you like, and hold water in periods of rainfall events for numerous months almost, and then slowly release that back into the canal. As part of a larger citywide thing, that's great in terms of land along the edges of the canals for Scottish canals can now look to be redeveloped as the water level can be controlled. Yeah, so the whole and the Wreck and Wet Meadows, the play, the grass, the setting, the housing in the landscape, and that being a real part and a real key sell to the place as itself. Here you see some BMX kind of trim trail tracks in the foreground there, and then some expansive lawns for WC community events taking place, and the kind of the curving nature of the play spine, the play equipment in the background, but again all integrated within the landscape. This is just a picture to show the kind of the street profile that we're working with as well. We've got almost got a really wide street profile. The buff on the right is your cycle bi-directional priority. We've then kind of a more subtle route to the left of that, which people can meander along. This is along the high street, the boulevard, if you like, of the development. There's little parkettes along there where people can stop and just enjoy the day. The kids can play. There's incidental play within these, and there's really just a big thing about incidental play and the landscape being playful, so that the kids walking to school or going to the shops, or there's something for them to do. It's an enjoyable journey and just not an A to B route. This is Canal Terrace, which is the Jack's Mountain reincarnation, if you like, and how we've the picture maybe doesn't do much justice there, but the buff footpath running from top to bottom takes out around an 8-metre level change. Sighthill never really had an accessible route to the canal edge. We've now provided that back. You know, again, a meandering route, people can enjoy the space. It's all seating along the edges. There's a direct route if people want to get straight to the bottom. We've got traverse walls. Again, you can see the housing starting to commence up on the top there, and basically what you see there that's still sort of soil, if you like, will over time become a residential development. Yeah, the Cuddies has been a really strong point here, and locally known by the residents as the Cuddies. So a standing stone circle, which was astronomically aligned, you know, one of the first for about, I think, 3,000 years in Scotland. We engaged with Duncan Lunan. We repositioned this in a really, you know, great point that's on the High Line, the skyline of the city, and if you kind of know where to look coming up out of George Square, you can see it sitting on the periphery of the site. And also the views to the north are fantastic as well. But it was really important here that the community and those around us were part of this, and people used to go here with loved ones. The ashes had been spread here. We worked to gather that soil. We involved them in respreading that soil, and there's new locations, spreading the flower meadow seeds, and yeah, it was just great to be able to keep them involved in the evolution of the design. Playful landscape I touched on, but again, you know, the integration, there's still a load of nets and things to finish this play equipment off here, but all kind of formed around a DNA structure rising in and out of the ground, you know, this, and then how that, you know, the DNA for Sighthill feeds all the way through the site. Again, the house is progressing in the background. Some of the play, you know, just the integration again. So bottom left's probably a good image just to explain where we were trying to be with the playful landscapes and the poles, you know, things to jump off, things to jump along, hop along, however the kids want to interact with them as they're making their journey to and from school or the city centre for that matter. It's been great as part of this as well that we can actually, we've been able to, you know, hone right down to the detail and execute this delivery on site over the last nearly 5 years. So yeah, everything from us drawing lines on a page after community consultation, right down to how edging details with suds and how we have bioretention and swales all work in the landscape is something we've managed to keep a keen eye on. Just some of more of the larger image is one of the suds basins, which is all planted up, and this actually connects to the canal. You can just see the basin of the canal in the far there, and that links back to the North Canal Bank Street. And yeah, it was just to finish off. I'm running out of time, I see. So Sighthill was a huge thing in terms of how future communities could integrate in a catalyst for change in the northern side of the city, and now that we've got that and the SUDS system within, others can now plug into that and free up development area in the northern. And the last point is really, and you know, we can't forget about this, there's a community there. We've brought the community on this journey. They've been with us the whole way. The contractor has at the same time. The figures are really great in terms of what we've managed to deliver back, but they've always had a voice. They always will have a voice, and we're really excited to just you know, having the big cutting the ribbon opening ceremony with them, because they're just excited as everybody else to get in and take it on as their space. Thank you. Sorry, ran over a little.
That's great. Thanks, Greg. Very interesting project again.
Thank you.
So yeah, great to have it explained in detail. If I can invite Duncan and Karen share their cameras again, then we can go into the Q&A session. I mean, just a general note first, I suppose that there's a few key strands that run through all three of your presentations and projects. Really, is that active travel, it's the responding to climate change, and in particular on the water impact of climate change, but also rejuvenating communities through your landscape work. So I think those are three really key things that are really great about all of them. Karen, for you first, we did get a question from Rachel, Tennant from Landscape Institute of Scotland. So I'm just going to put that to you. So yeah, Karen was saying a very proactive, innovative strategy that you've got with climate evolution, and just a query on the time frame. Really, you said 30-year time frame. So what are your thoughts on that? Will things and yeah, do you think that's a realistic time frame? Do you think some things might happen sooner? Is there any plans in place to kick things off soon?
Well, given that we're 2 years down the line already, nearly from when we started this process, and it's only going to be adopted this autumn, and the amount of tweaking that has gone through with the report as it's gone through the whole committee cycle, and the agencies have all picked it apart, landowners. This was a more ambitious strategy, I have to say, right at the beginning, and it has been watered down. Yeah, I think 30 years is probably really ambitious. Really, so we set it into short, medium, and long term. The short term would be about 10 years. And what we've done there is try to sort of do a lot of scene setting. So a lot of the studies, which would then lead to big projects, would be put in train. And then some of the easy wins as well, particularly around transport and setting up gateway hubs. Yeah, the answer is, Rachel, I don't know. I suspect 30 years is too short a timescale to deliver a strategy like this. But given the summer we've all just lived through, the amount of flooding we've seen all across Europe, we haven't even started on the Australian summer and forest fires there again. Yeah, 30 years is too long to deliver a strategy like this, but it would be really ambitious if we had managed to achieve that.
Yeah, well, at least your quick actions will be starting a lot sooner than that anyway. Really? Keep our fingers crossed. Yeah. Good. That's great, Karen. Another point then on going back to the smart canal point, which ran through Duncan and Greg, both of your presentations, and Karen, obviously you're responding to water management as well. Are there any more detail on how that smart canal works that Duncan or Greg could add in a couple of minutes? Or is it too technical for you to get into?
I'm looking at Greg, see if he wants to try and chat. Greg did quite a nice summary of how it works in principle. I don't think either Greg or myself could explain the technicalities in 2 minutes, but I mean, it's part of the Metropolitan Glasgow strategic drainage scheme, and it uses kind of predictive sensor technology to predict or monitor rainfall. And in simple terms, Scottish Canals can control the water levels in the canal as a result, which would then allow the discharge of water from surface areas elsewhere on the network. So it facilitates SUDS drainage in areas where SUDS drainage would not be able to be accommodated if it wasn't for the smart canal. Greg, do you want to add anything to that? Have I
I think that
mumbled my way through that?
No, I would say that's probably as good as you and I could do. But no, it's great in terms of a wider city strategy for allowing, kind of brownfield and, areas prone to floods to be activated, whether that's through residential or through, what we're talking about here, landscape activity and getting people in and around these spaces.
Kind of it's an enabler for all this development, really, isn't it? I think I read somewhere that the other technique would be to put your humongous sewer in, which would be, a few £100 million effectively. So it's a much lower impact method to open up that area of the city, I think. And yeah, allows you to actually build houses and use the space. Yeah, okay, great. I think one note that I noticed through presentations was just the fun that you've built into some of the designs. So, especially Duncan and Greg, yours, I realize, you've got slides in there, great spaces where people will play and dwell. And I just wondered, is that something that came through the brief, or is that something you just have in your, that's your approach now for all of your projects, both of you? Do you think of it as including fun in your designs?
I think for Claypits, initially it came from the extensive community consultation during the charrette and then subsequent events we had thereafter. I mean, a lot of the fun came from that, and I mean, the community were great. They wanted to use the space in a fun way. So I think it kind of just developed from there, and then obviously we've integrated bits and pieces of fun ourselves. I mean, we were fortunate enough to work with one or two artists on Claypits, and they brought some innovative ideas themselves, and we've just tried to, I mean, in some areas of Claypits, we've tried to do not very much other than just provide basic access infrastructure and kind of reveal the site for what it is. But then the kind of fun aspects, or the kind of interventions, are quite small scale. But when we have had interventions, we have tried to make them interesting and fun to encourage people to use the site and engage with it.
Yeah, that's great. Great to hear. Another one for you, Greg. Rachel was asking about your project, and asking what percentage of the green element is designated for SUDs.
Yeah, and I did see that in the chat actually, and it's a really good question, and I'll go away and find out the actual numbers, because it's not something that I know off the top of my head, but it's probably really quite difficult to quantify because it has been a principle from the outset. So everything within the parkland has an element that's related to a SUDS design, whether it's surface water or catchment from other areas within the park through the SUDS ponds, the swales, the basins. The carriageways are then all taken through a bioretention system and into a swale. So all their drainage is coming through a swale system. And then even with the likes of Canal Terrace, which is quite a hard landscape, those again are all going through a level of treatment through a SUDS device of some sort or some way before, you know, reaching the canal. So it really is wholly integrated. But yeah, I'll go and find that stat out.
Yes, you do that. Get back to us on that. And another question, I think mainly for Duncan, which was mainly about, it's around, I guess, commitment to long-term maintenance of the spaces you've created. Is there anything you can say about that, Duncan, for your project?
Yeah, so the Claypits will be managed by a volunteer local community group who are very active, been involved all the way through. I mean, the charrette again helped establish that group. I think they've got over 2,000 members now, and a kind of management kind of board that, I mean, they're always out doing kind of bits and pieces on site, from what I can see on social media anyway. I think the exception to that would be the physical grey infrastructure associated with the SUDS. I mean, we've tried to naturalize the SUDS as much as possible to integrate it with the nature reserve, but we haven't been able to avoid head walls and some pipes here or there. So Scottish Water retain ownership and management of those assets, and Scottish Canals are also taking on the management and maintenance of the kind of bridge structures. But the community group they've taken on the wider site in terms of vegetation establishment, all the path infrastructure, the viewpoints, the bits of play kit, all that kind of thing.
I think probably we can draw parallels with that at Sighthill as well, but something I kind of failed to mention throughout ours was there's so Morgan Sindall Infrastructure have been the main contractor to deliver Contract 2, as we call it, which is all the advanced works which I spoke about, and then the housing is following on. But Morgan Sindall and through their subcontractors have a responsibility to maintain and look after the majority of the soft landscaping. for a 5-year period. And that's just really to ensure that, you know, everything has been captured and everything is surviving and doing as well as it can, because thereafter it will fall back to being a Glasgow City Council adopted park. So that was a major thing for us, and that didn't really fall through a brief. That was really through us pushing for the best of what we could get and make sure we had a successful landscape scheme that really, when it was being handed over, all that was left to be doing was the grass cutting and the tidying up and the tree pruning here and there.
Yeah, so a mix of approaches there, I guess. Mix between the council and volunteers between projects, which is interesting. Yeah, okay. Okay, I mean, I'm gonna have to wrap things up now. So I mean, one final point I suppose I'd like to just briefly say is that you're all trying to respond to this point of, well, climate change adaptation, I guess, in all your projects. And from my work in climate change adaptation, I know that we're going to be getting heavier rainfall more often. So it doesn't mean it's going to rain all the time, but more incidences of heavy rainfall. And I guess that's what's driving a lot of your projects at the minute, dealing with big amounts of water in a short period, which is what the Smart Canal is about, and all of your SUDS work is about dealing with. So it's really interesting to see it happening in practice and it happening in your strategy as well, Karen, that you're all addressing this. And one last point on the, Karen, on your presentation where you brought up the cost impacts and that it's cheaper to act now. Just obviously in the news this week, various politicians complaining that acting on climate change is too expensive, so they can't do it. Just brings it back that it's going to be even more expensive if you don't act on it. So please just get on with it. But so it's great to see people actually doing it in practice. So yeah, thank you for your work. 3 great projects to go over there. And Karen, hope yours all gets done as quickly as possible. Yeah, so basically thank you to the speakers. Thanks to everyone who attended. We've got one more of these events coming up before COP happens. It'll be on the 6th of October, so you can look out for that if you want to sign up for that one. We're going to be talking about, well, it won't be landscape architecture next time. It'll be about geopolymer concrete and mass timber, Scottish mass timber industry, and a couple of other things which we'll confirm before then. So yeah, hope to see some of you there. And for now, I'll say goodbye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, cheers.
Cheers all. The recording will also be up on the GIA website within the week. Thanks all.
Okay, thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye.